over. I mean, the election is certified. Some of these challenges like are ongoing. We're still kind of shocked at some of what we've seen over the past week or so, and all that. But we'll put that aside for now, and we do get to look forward because Steve, as you noted, we did go through our census enumeration process, and actually there was just more news over the weekend that, this won't be any news to a lot of folks in this group if you've been following things closely or working directly in the census work, but there were some challenges in getting a complete count. And there's usually a strict timeline along when we get census data. It may be adjusted this time around. So anyway, we got this monster election behind us, and yeah, we do the census every 10 years. And that means it's time for redistricting. 70 and a whole bunch of other groups have been very much involved in state level redistricting for upwards of 4 or 5 years now. Again, I know I'm speaking this evening to a group that's kind of hyper informed, plugged into politics both at the local and state level. I think this group already probably has a good sense of when it comes to drawing political districts. We very much want to include and give power to the public, the folks who are going to be represented, to the absolute greatest extent possible. And if at all possible, we try to codify that power, basically by, what a go-to model is to put in place an independent commission of citizens to draw our maps. So, that's been a campaign that's been underway at the state level for upwards of 5 years now, both to try to get commissions in place to draw our state legislative, that's our state house and our state senate maps, and our congressional maps. It's been a long campaign, and we're not there yet. But despite all of this activity around state level and federal level redistricting and gerrymandering, that act of drawing crooked political boundaries for one reason or another, we have actually not been talking too much about local redistricting, and that's why it's phenomenal that we're talking about this this evening a little bit. Just a kind of an initial discussion, which frankly has been helpful for me as well. We did a little bit of planning around Councilman Redistricting 70 a year or two ago, but then had to full tilt towards the 2020 election. So it's been actually helpful to dust off some of these redistricting slides and look forward again. But again, as this group knows, we have political districts in our city, and we do have to draw those from time to time, every 10 years after that census. We do have the 17 council members. 7 of them are at large, representing the whole city, and then 10 of them are geography or district specific, right? So what I'm going to go through in the following slides are some of the reasons we should be thinking about redistricting in Philadelphia, why it matters. A quick kind of snapshot about how it works in other cities. There is a way to change the way that the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter currently says that we redistrict. I'm not sure if that's going to come to pass, but it is worth looking elsewhere to see how they do things. And then lastly, and this is, I'd certainly very much welcome throughout this, but especially at the end, kind of questions and thoughts and concerns around how this will play out this next cycle. Because if the status quo process remains, which is basically city council drawing their maps and the mayor having to sign that bill, if it's not a veto-proof vote, then again, we just want to include as many people in that process as possible. And we've certainly had some issues in the past. So I know there's a lot of text on this slide. I realize that we're also going to cover a ton of ground. So at the end, I'm sure again we're going to have plenty of time for questions and thoughts. Here, let me just move over my window just a tad so I can see the rest of these slides. So initial reasons to start thinking about redistricting here in Philadelphia with our 10 councilmanic districts that have to get redrawn. First of which is that our charter, which is basically it's kind of like our local constitution. It dictates how local government is put together. It does say that we have to redistrict the city every 10 years after that census data is available, and within 6 months. So there's a strict timeline there. That's one reason we have to do it. It's required by law. Another reason, and this is obviously the reason why we redistrict at the state or federal level, is because populations change, right? I mean, people move around into places, out of places. People are born, people pass away, and to make sure that the bedrock principle of one person, one vote is held up, we have to redraw these lines to make sure the population, the populations within districts are roughly equal. Another reason it's really good we're starting to think about this now is that this has not been a smooth process in past cycles. I was actually, truth be told, I was like scrambling to try to catch up again on some of the history of the past redistricting cycles we've had in Philly. And they've never been smooth. They've often had all sorts of disputes, big and small, and have pretty much always resulted in shapes that are somewhat problematic for one reason or another. And again, one of the reasons it's really important we talk about this sooner rather than later is so that we can maximize public engagement, citizen engagement in this process ahead of time, to minimize the chances of those kind of funky shapes. Which gets to the last reason here. Certainly in the past we've had some egregiously gerrymandered districts. The districts we have right now are actually far better than the ones we previously had, but they're still. I'm sure some folks would argue that the districts we have right now are in pretty good shape. Others would argue that there's a lot that needs to change, and that having that public debate and that public discussion is very much what we want to get towards. So this is what the law says. There's actually not that much in the charter about this. And again, it's probably unlikely that we're going to have a big discussion debate around how this language changes. But and I'm going to read through this just to make sure we get every last bit of it here. So there's just several sentences. For a first sentence says, it shall be mandatory. It shall be the mandatory duty of the council to redistrict the city within 6 months after the publication of the United States Census Bureau of the population of the city at each decennial census. This is basically a requirement about when this has to happen, which is the census data becoming available. That triggers everywhere, local, state, and federal. When the redistricting takes place, obviously you can't be drawing those lines unless we have that data. So that's the first. That's kind of like the start gun. The next sentence is actually all that we have to go on as to what these districts should look like. Each district shall consist of a ward or contiguous wards containing as nearly as possible the population factor obtained by dividing the city's population at the preceding decennial census by 10, kind of a fancier way than we need to say of getting the whole city's population, dividing it by 10. And that's what each district needs to have. So, roughly over the, a decent number of years, the city population has been about more or less 1.5 million people. You divide that by 10, that gets you roughly 150,000. So, this is where, for those folks who've been following the debate about state legislative and congressional redistricting, there are various criteria that folks have been trying to get codified into law. I mean, Fair Districts PA has kind of been the main grassroots organization pushing for this in Harrisburg for a number of years now, getting compact districts, districts that maybe that they're responsive to the electorate. Language that replicates what's in the Voting Rights Act already about making sure that a minority is able to elect a candidate of their choice. So there are all sorts of different criteria that can be packaged into law, but this is all we have right here in Philly. Just that the population has to be roughly equal, and that the wards, and I know everybody here is also plugged into our ward structure. That the wards have to be kept together as to the greatest extent possible. Not picking off a ward from the Northeast and a ward from the Southwest and having those be in the same district. And then lastly, funny enough, most of the text that's in our charter about how this works is about what happens if we don't draw the lines in a quick enough time. So at the expiration of the 6 months period, if Philadelphia City Council shall have failed to redistrict the city as herein required, the council member shall not receive any further salaries until the council shall have passed and there shall have approved a redistricting ordinance as herein required, or until such ordinance shall become law without the mayor's approval. So this is where, when we draw lines, and this actually happens at the congressional level as well here in Pennsylvania. At the congressional level, our General Assembly, our state legislature, simply passes a bill that describes what the districts look like, and the governor has to sign it, or that governor can veto it, so that there's a check and balance there. And we have a similar situation here in Philadelphia where city council can pass a bill, as they usually do all the time, and the mayor can sign it or veto it. So for a simple majority to pass a bill, it's 9 votes of the 17. If there's a dispute between city council and the mayor, and there has been before, council can get past the mayor, but they need at least that supermajority vote or 12 votes to pass it, even if the mayor would try to veto it. So it's interesting. I mean, for all the the power and import that's kind of wrapped up in the redistricting process. This is all this is all that the charter says about it, which I think, what I'd stress again here, and what I think I'd love to have a discussion about at the end is if these words are not going to change, if we're not going to amend our charter before we do this, which I bet that we're not, then how can we guarantee outside of reforming the law that we engage the public to the greatest extent possible in this process? And that, again, that is really the name of the game here. So this is the timeline. Again, this is when census data is available, this is what triggers redistricting at every level, local, state, and federal. Typically by law, the data is supposed to be available by March 31st. Given the news that we just had this weekend about the fairly significant irregularities and the problems that the Census Bureau has had in counting people, this deadline is actually not set, but presuming the data were available, and let's say it wasn't available earlier in March, because the data can be available before this time too, but let's say it's available by March 31st, that would be the start gun, and City Council would have 6 months from that day, March 31st, and that would get them to the end of September to get that plan approved. And again, there are basically two ways that happens. Either they pass a bill that the mayor approves, or if there's a tussle with the mayor, they can get past the mayor and with at least 12 votes pass it without their approval. And this is significant, and they would want to get this done because we will have councilmatic elections and a big mayoral election as well in 2023. Of course, Mayor Jim Kenney is term limited, so this will be a really, really big election for the city of Philadelphia. And these would be the districts that we would use in those. Then that May primary in 2023, and then the general election in 2023. Of course, these folks would be taking office according to these new districts the following year in 2024. So, Steve, do you want to pause for a moment if there are questions on this stuff, or do you want to kind of hold off until the end?
Yeah, we can pause if anybody has questions. Again, if you have questions, you could just raise your hand and then I'll unmute you. I think folks should be able to unmute themselves though.
This is Linda White. I have one question. What person or committee or whatever in council is responsible for organizing all this information for the March 31st timeframe?
That is a really good question. I think this process, inside the building, has varied from cycle to cycle, and it depends on the composition of council, who the council president is. I believe they held in the last cycle at least a couple public hearings on the maps where people could come and have their input about how these would be rolled out. But that's not in the charter, and so I think there are a number of different ways that could be set up. But I will go back. One of the things I figure I do, I got my piece of paper right here, my notepad. Wherever they've had these hearings before, I'll check on that. Okay. I got to imagine this whatever hearing they've had, it's been open to the whole council since they all have a role in passing the maps. But that's a really good question.
So they will communicate public information when the hearings are available so that people can attend.
Well, if they're holding a public hearing, then okay. Some notices by law would be required. But okay. Again, and this is kind of like a fact of life for government. There is what's required by law, and then it's also what are the public officials also going to do to go above and beyond what the law says. And I think that's where there's a good bit of time here to get organized, meet with council members, maybe express if there aren't opinions about what the district should be. And I don't think it'd be tougher to do that because we don't have the data yet. At a minimum, to start to talk about what we want this process to look like. Which again, this is one of those the more transparent the better, and the more public input we get, the better. But that's a great question, and I'll do my best to get answers or at least partial answers to everything that comes up this evening, and get a follow up to Steve.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Christmas?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you so much for coming and sharing thus far. My question goes to the issue of the census related to people who are displaced because of the COVID COVID-19 pandemic.
Mhm.
Some people where they have lived, they may have had to relocate. I know I've heard stories where grandchildren go to assist their grandparents who are at home by themselves. So if a census was taken and that were the case, when those grandchildren would go back to their homes, the census really wouldn't properly represent where they reside, and as a result, maybe funding for schools or playgrounds or other things
Mhm.
wouldn't adequately represent them. So I think that a lot of people right now are displaced because of this pandemic, as well as um, another issue that's occurring in Philadelphia is a lot of the people who lived in the suburbs and raised their children, they're coming back with the gentrification, coming back to the city.
Mhm.
And those communities where people have lived for years, once the gentrification process occurs, they're displaced because their taxes go up higher and they can't afford the taxes. And so they're being relocated from out of the areas where they grew up, where they lived. So those are my concerns related, to the census and the current challenges that um, that we're facing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you named a couple really big issues here. I mean, yeah, the first being that those those communities and those folks who are under normal-ish circumstances are difficult to count. People of color, children in particular, folks without internet access, tougher to count under normal conditions. The pandemic made that all the tougher. So yeah, that is a problem. The other and a challenge. The other big thing you just named is as far as why these districts matter. I mean, at the state level, how the districts are drawn and how that impacts partisan representation in the General Assembly and things like school funding, like that. That comes up. But at the local level, at the councilmatic level, yeah, development and gentrification are one of the top kind of reasons this would have an immediate impact on people. Obviously, like the 10 district members having each kind of their own way of approaching development and gentrification. So yeah, I'm afraid as far as that second point you made, you just hit the nail on the head as far as like why people should very much care about this, especially as neighborhoods gentrify and change. And then on the latter, on the former point about the difficulty in counting folks, yeah, I'm not sure exactly like how much damage was done in terms of like having a more difficult time counting folks because of the pandemic. But I just know that it is going to impact the count that'll then impact both local, state, and federal redistricting. I mean, Steve, maybe you might have some more stuff on that as well, as far as like the challenges in getting the census done. But that was one of a number of big reasons why, yeah, this count this year will be problematic.
Yeah, I mean, we at 1PA, we had plans to knock on like 160,000 doors 3 times to make sure that people accurately complete the census, but March threw all of that out the window. And we had to quickly switch from doors to phone and texting. I will say though, it was harder to like follow up and get actual like, oh, did this person actually complete the census? But we were able to communicate with people, but it's just harder to like, part of it, we couldn't help people complete this, like, well, you couldn't help people complete the census even if you were going to their doors, but that interaction, that face-to-face interaction and answering people's questions, we couldn't do that. So, and that was an issue. I think the coalition was like 60 different organizations doing the work across the state, and we all faced that issue. So it's definitely going to have some impact on the count, and just because we weren't able to reach people in the way we wanted to.
Mr. Steve,
Yeah.
did you the people who did go to do the face-to-face, the door knockers, did they find that the residents who did come to the door was very reluctant, suspicious?
No, no, that's a good question. So we did, I think, so a lot of members on this call too were part of the initial process in January, where we knew people in our community were very skeptical for whatever reason of completing a census, right? Whether it's mistrust of government or just like not privacy issues. And we did a listening session with our members to kind of hear them out and like specifically what the apprehension around the census was. Taking that information, a lot of folks at PA Voice, a lot of folks that were working on like trying to make sure people count, complete the census, created messaging around that. And a lot of it was right, like people said, yeah, if someone came to my door and told me it was my civic duty or like the government needs me to do this, I wouldn't do it. But if someone talked to me about how does the census connect to my school library? How does the census connect to the playground or those kids who are looking for jobs? That message resonate more and like kind of like agitated people more to like want to complete the census. So that's what we did, and it worked. It started to work at least. Again, but it's much harder to do that over the phone or through text messaging. So I think that's the worry. Our goal was to like have those deep conversations with people at the door, but we couldn't do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah. All right. Good questions. So this kind of gets to Annette, what you just raised. Wherever you are in the United States, when you draw these districts, you're doing this because of population changes, right? And again, we have this. We have court decisions that tell us we have to have roughly equal population. That looks a little bit different at the local, state, and federal level, but roughly equal population between districts. Keep upholding the one person, one vote principle. And in Philly, this is probably a little bit outdated now. We had a very capable intern who pulled these slides together a year or two ago. But the data on the left-hand side that you're seeing is from the U.S. Census Bureau and the I can't remember how frequently they do it, but the American Community Survey, which they do on a more regular basis, not every 10 years like the full-blown census count, but it's a more regular kind of sampling. For everyone here who's familiar for Philly, these are probably not going to be surprising trends, but there's population growth in Center City, right? Folks moving into Philadelphia, and that's where a lot of them are landing. And some population growth in the lower Northeast, some population growth in South Philly, and then at least over the period of time that this data was gathered, which is roughly 2012 to 2016, there was some population loss as well. West Philly, North Philly, and the far Northeast. So, of course, once we have the full census data, and although it will obviously not be perfect census data or perfect data on the count everywhere, that'll give us it will give us a fuller picture of what's changed in Philadelphia in 2020 versus in 2000. And one of the reasons actually this has been kind of a little bit more interesting recently in the cities, because we have had some population growth, not massive growth, but population growth starting around 2007 or so, versus the relatively minor decreases we had in the years before that. And actually, a lot of that growth coming from folks who've moved into Philly from other countries where they were born, which actually it gets to some of the more stickier and contested narratives that have come up in past redistricting cycles. So, again, this data, these numbers are just a little bit outdated at this point, but that's why we are waiting for the census to release its data, and we'll have the fullest possible picture to draw these lines later this year. So I just mentioned how there are some kind of sticky and contested and fraught narratives and processes in drawing these lines before. And this is where I was trying to catch up on some of the storyline. I know that some of the folks on the call this evening, I'm sure, are very much plugged into this because you've been through these battles before. But I think the overall theme or even fact of life that we should take away from this, and then looking forward to this year, is like this has never been a smooth process, and it's never been a process where the interests of the public as best we could define them have been put forward as a number one priority, with all other political or financial interests put behind them. In 1990, for example, there wasn't a map approved until 1992, and there was a fight over creating a majority Latino district. Right, this is up in North Philly, and this is actually this was a racial gerrymandering issue that persisted from 1990 to 2000 all the way to 2010. Incidentally, there were other kind of political dynamics that came up and political fights that came up in each of these cycles, even things that had nothing to do with redistricting. And nothing to do with democratic representation, having to do with either just personalities or various kind of municipal initiatives that the given mayor might have been supportive of. But I think one of the kind of the most stark examples of this process having gone awry, probably the most stark example, is the racial gerrymandering that took place in North Philly repeatedly, and that has only been I think probably I think most folks would agree addressed thoroughly in this last cycle. So the map you're seeing off to the right hand side here, I hope everyone can see the full slides now, shows what our council districts used to look like. Some of them look fairly sensible. I'm sure that folks who are familiar with Philadelphia neighborhoods, looks like the District 2, District 3, probably make a decent bit of sense. But the ones that stand out obviously are Districts 5 and District 7. And I know I'm speaking to a more kind of informed group this evening, but that term gerrymander, when I'm talking about this stuff with high school students, I remind them that those bold terms that come up in their textbooks, redistricting and gerrymandering are always bold terms in our social studies textbooks. It's kind of tough to see from those words on the page how much power is at stake, real power is at stake. In these processes. So, the fact that, for example, the 7th councilmatic district up there in North Philly was gerrymandered horribly. You can see most of it's in North Philly that captures much of the Latino community in North Philly, but a chunk of the 7th snakes in and around Roosevelt Boulevard, stretching pretty deep up into Northeast Philadelphia, which obviously it gets more and more white the further up you go in Northeast Philly. And that was to protect an incumbent council member who was white at the time. So this was the 7th, and you can see the 5th there as well. The 5th district as well. Snakes in and around Roosevelt Boulevard into lower Northeast have actually been among the worst examples of gerrymandering at any level, local, state, or federal, across the country. But fortunately, the maps we have today I think look substantially better than the ones we had previously. Whoops, didn't mean I put that map in there twice. So I mentioned just momentarily the sorts of factors that can come up, at the state and the federal level, and the reforms that we and many others have been trying to put in place in Harrisburg. A lot of that fight is over a couple things: guarding against partisan gerrymandering, where either your Republicans are trying to advantage themselves over the Democrats, or Democrats over the Republicans, or racial gerrymandering that can take place at the state and federal level. And sometimes the racial and partisan gerrymandering kind of like overlap, which is often the case, since there tend to be far more people of color who are registered Democrats in a given community. So, in Philly, there's the partisan dynamic comes up a little bit less, simply because Philadelphia is so overwhelmingly a Democratic city. I know everybody here already knows this. More than 7 Democrats for every 1 Republican. And where partisan analysis comes up, it's going to be in the lower and maybe parts of the upper Northeast, where there tend to be more Republicans, probably a little bit less so in the South. But the 10th councilmatic district, where Councilmember Brian O'Neill has been for about 40 plus years now. He's a Republican, and I know that this is something that he keeps close tabs on, as to how that southern part of this 10th district is drawn, keeping track how many Democrats versus how many Republicans. So that partisan gerrymandering, which comes up as such a big issue at the state and federal level, is a little bit less so at the local level with our council districts. But these other things come up a great deal. Campaign finance, basically, where you can get political donations. Center City being where there is, where much of the wealth is concentrated. If you got a sliver of Center City, you're probably going to have a decent chance of getting larger political donations. The second item here, this is the personalities or the local kind of parochial ward conflicts that can come up. Again, I know everybody here is familiar with the ward system, and our ward system, the committee people and the ward leaders who make them up, having such a great deal of influence over who wins office here in this town. This is something else that, not just the council members, but the ward leaders themselves keep in mind as far as which council member district they may be a part of. So those sorts of kind of ward-based factors come up. And then lastly, diluting minority votes and racial gerrymandering has been a problem that we've had here in Philadelphia as well. So these are several of the factors that come up. The other thing, though, I think I don't think is actually in the slide deck, but which Annette has already raised for us, is the fact that these district council positions are positions of great power because of their say so on what gets developed and what doesn't, right? Zoning variances and land sales, and this probably mattered a bit less in years past where the city was not growing and we weren't building as many buildings. Folks were not trying to move in, but obviously that has changed in recent history, and with modest population growth and with residential and commercial buildings being put together and gentrification happening in some parts of the city. Who your district council member is matters a great deal, probably in a way that it didn't matter in the same way as far as development goes in years past. So that's the other major factor surely in this upcoming cycle, is who your council member may or may not be, and how they approach development. So, I mentioned that the prior maps had a couple of the most egregious examples of gerrymandering. The 7th Councilmanic District in particular that cracked the Latino community. I kind of skipped over the basics of gerrymandering at the beginning of this deck. And I know a lot of folks who here are hyper informed, but the basic principles of gerrymandering is either packing people together so that they're not sufficiently represented, or cracking their community apart so they're not sufficiently represented. So the 7th Councilmanic District, having cracked the Latino community for multiple cycles, prevented them from getting their representation on council. So those gerrymanders being certainly addressed to a great extent in the last cycle. These are the maps we have now, the 1st through the 10th districts. And the intern we had, I'm not sure exactly. I guess they might have pulled this off their candidacy paperwork, but also added in stars for where each of our council members live roughly. And surely there's a story or a set of stories that goes into each of these districts. I mean, this is just kind of the way things are. I mean, for better or for worse, whether you're a council member or a state representative, state senator, congressional member, you know where your district lines are. I mean, that's something they have to know. It's their job to know where these districts are, so they can represent people properly. So, surely when the lines get redrawn, our elected officials pay a great deal of attention to very much exactly where these lines go. So anyway, this is where the what the current kind of lineup looks like. Overall, I think it's fair to say much more sensible than they were in the prior cycle. So just a quick glimpse of how this works elsewhere. So we pulled together for a number of other cities, some of which look closer to Philly than others, what their map drawing process looks like for their local political districts. And we broke it up in this way. And I think the first thing I'd call out here from the way we analyze the way the redistricting process works, and this is again, this is the sort of change, the sort of reform that a lot of folks have been working on this at the state level for some time, is first, who gets to draw the maps, who actually gets to draw that map, who gets to modify that map, and finally, who gets to approve it. There's a great deal of power in each of these 3 basic steps. In the, well, at least in some folks' opinions, either many of the reformers' opinions, the Committee of 70's opinion, the best possible model for drawing political maps at any level, local, state, or federal, you're going to give power to the people to do each of these things. The power to the people to draw an initial map, power to the people to modify a potential map, and then lastly, the power to the people to approve a potential map. So, looking at the cities here and kind of where they've gone, if first on the left-hand side, we have those cities where it's we've just called it entirely a political process. Basically, the local legislature gets to draw its own map, either through a full council or through a committee. There's Philadelphia. We're number 2 in the parentheses we have here. It's the number of council districts or district specific representatives, and the number of at-large representatives. So that's where you see next to Philadelphia, we have 10 district council members and then 7 at-large members. Boston, for example, has 9 district members and 4 at-large members, 4 at-large. Chicago, oh man, Chicago has 50 aldermanic members, and then no folks for at-large. So if you do want to look at another, not just another city, but another state that has some real political challenges, Chicago usually gives us a real run for our money. Both the city of Chicago and then the state as a whole, Springfield being where their state government's based, has a similar history to Philadelphia and to Harrisburg, and their fair share of challenges. So, there's Philly, right? Our council members themselves, the folks who will be running on these maps, are the folks who draw them. There are a few cities where there's a citizens advisory committee, a group of people of voters who get both to draw the maps, at least the initial maps, and then there's a round of public input, and then they get to modify those maps. That actually includes New York City, that has 51 council members, Pittsburgh as well, incidentally. And then actually all across the United States, there's actually only one city we could find, only one city where there's a full-fledged independent citizens commission where folks from the community, they draw the map, they modify the map after a round of public input or 2, and then they get to approve the final map. So, Philadelphia being among those cities where it's our council members themselves who get to draw their own maps. Not the best process, but also not entirely unusual. The only other city that kind of stands out on its own here is Hartford, Connecticut, where there are no district council members at all, and they're 8 at large, so they don't have to worry about the councilman redistricting process in the slightest. So that's the way it works for right now in Philadelphia and in other cities. Again, I think we're planning on our council members being the ones who draw these maps, but they do have to draw up a bill, and that means they have to have a public hearing, and there has to be a kind of a minimal amount of public input, and then unless there's a supermajority vote of at least 12 to get past the mayor, there's a bit of a check and balance between the city council and mayor in determining what these districts are. So that's what gets us to actually, I'll pause for just a second. And Steve, any other kind of initial questions you're seeing in the chat, or just any on what I've covered so far? And if not, I figure what we talked about last is like kind of what we might anticipate in this upcoming cycle, and then the best ways to get people involved.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I just wanted to also point out, since this last session we talked about ward leaders and the ward structure, this is I think is a perfect blend of the last 2 weeks, because one of the things we learned the last session was we came away understanding that it's kind of crazy that a person could be a district council person and be the ward leader at the same time, given that ward leaders are the ones who kind of determine who gets on the ballots, determine who actually can have significant power over who can win the election. So if you're a ward leader and a council person, you're not going to endorse your opponent, you're going to endorse yourself. And so in addition to that, you also get to draw your own political map. So it's a lot of power in the hands of the district council people and the council people who are supposed to be, representing us. And there's no real, they control essentially all the power that would actually, any avenues that we would have to make the district council seats competitive or election competitive. They control most of those avenues if they are both ward leaders and they are also redrawing their own maps. So I think that's a perfect blend. The only question I had is it too late to change the charter to have a citizens commission to draw the map?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is. I guess I was kind of masking over that fact. But if let's say the Census Bureau is able to actually get its data together and it's released in March, to amend the charter, council has to pass a resolution, and actually they have to pass a bill as well that describes what that question would be. That has to go to the ballot, and then the people have to vote on it. This is part of the reason actually council worked very, very quickly to pass a number of police reform related measures. They got them through several months ago, before the summer break, wasn't it? Whew, man, time flies. They hustled to get those measures through before the summer break so that people could vote on them on November 3rd. So yes, it is too late to amend the charter. I mean, maybe if there's enough interest in this stuff and we get past like this redistricting cycle, there'd be a chance to amend the charter prior to the 2030 redistricting cycle. But yeah, we're not going to amend this charter before this next round. But as a good old reformer, it's never too early to talk about some of the things we could change. So yeah, this council drawing its maps is the process we're going to be going with this time around.
And I will say, to answer that question too, is like there is a way we can hold our district, our council directly, like the council people we're connected with, we can hold them accountable and have them lobby and fight for a robust citizen, like a process that involves the people of Philadelphia, even though right now they hold a lot of power, right? Like we can have them do more public events. We can have them kind of like, I would love to have a district council person in their communities draw maps with their constituents and then using that to inform how they go into that meeting, right? Like, so there is ways we can make it a public process. The other question was, can a ward be split between council districts and how are the wards drawn? Which goes to like, can our wards kind of redistrict in the same way?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So the wards can and have to be split to satisfy the kind of the population requirement. Again, the law basically says you got to take the full city population. Let's say, just for the sake of simple math, it's 1.5 million. Divided by 10, it gets about 150,000. So we have to divide or at least some of the wards have to be divided to satisfy that equal population criterion. Again, the law does say that wards it has to be contiguous wards, basically wards that are next to each other. So you can't be like plucking off wards that aren't connected and sticking them into the same district. Yeah, it's a very insightful question. Like, so if the wards are codified in the charter and the ward districts matter as to how councilmatic districts are drawn, like, yeah, shouldn't those ward districts, like, shouldn't those be drawn on a regular basis? And the answer is that those ward districts are not drawn on a regular basis, and there's no requirement, like obviously, that we do that every 10 years. If there were a legal requirement to redraw the ward boundaries after every census, we'd be getting ready to do that too. And the ward boundaries, oh man, there was a Facebook back and forth about this at least a year or two ago, and the ward boundaries have not been redrawn for at least 50 or 60 years, I think, at least that far back. And there is a process for that in state law. I believe that requires a petition. I mean, there's a petition process. You get a requisite number of signatures from, I believe it's whichever many wards would be affected by a given redrawing. Let's say, a sufficient number of citizens get together or voters get together from 4 different wards, and those 4 different wards say, hey, we want to redraw the lines that just affects these 4 different wards in a given way. That petition gets brought, I believe, to the Common Pleas Court. And that's basically, I think, the process that you go about for redrawing those wards. Again, it has to happen in a long time. If you want to take like a wasp nest and just beat it with a baseball bat, maybe consider going through the process of drawing those ward boundaries. I'm kidding. We really should. That's an excellent question, and we really should have like a discussion about these ward boundaries because they have not been redrawn for a long time. And whereas, I'm not sure if this would actually be a great, kind of follow-up to have, like, to what extent does that really matter for like public representation in city council? It very much has an impact on political representation in city committee, right? If some wards are much bigger than others, that violates kind of the equal population principle, one person, one vote that we have for public districts, political districts where folks are represented in council or general assembly or on Congress. So if the one person, one vote principle matters for public office, I mean, shouldn't it also matter for partisan office? So that's an excellent question. I mean, maybe that would be like not even like a Ward 101 or 102. That'd be like a 301 question. And then like the organizing, Steve, I think you just got nominated to lead that exploration of redrawn ward districts. But it's a really good question. There's a process in state law, and it hasn't been taken on for a long time. And just to be frank, it's because that would be a very, very tricky political and organizing endeavor. So On that cheery note, I'll take us back into in a more maybe more positive territory. So, like, what is the best way to draw political maps? There are so many discussions and so many debates around independent commissions or this criteria or that criteria or exactly how you draw and involve the public and put that in law. So many debates in Harrisburg around this. I mean, the bottom line is given as much power and input to the general public as you possibly can, and by the general public, I would also stress this is not just voters. This is everybody who's represented, and by everybody, that's everybody, whether or not they're a registered voter. So, knowing that the charter's not going to change, and city council will be going through a process of drafting up a bill that says how the districts are drawn. That big question just becomes how do we best involve the public in that process, whether it's formally through council's own hearings or something supplemental to that. Steve just gave kind of like an excellent example that I think there's been some kind of initial discussion of, and if this came to place, this would be marvelous. But for district council members to be part of the process and discussion, like with the folks at least in their current districts, about what the maps look like. And that can happen all sorts of ways through council's formal hearing process or external that. A really fortunate thing is that technology has progressed and allowed not just political professionals to easily draw a political district, but at least for one full redistricting cycle, starting with 2010, there's been software available that anyone can use. So there was actually in 2010 at the council level here in Philly, there was a project to involve folks from across the city drafting councilmanic districts that were then brought to council in testimony. And that 2010 councilmanic redistricting kind of citizen engagement process was the origins of the now the statewide Draw the Lines PA campaign that 70 hosts that gets after state legislative and congressional districts. So I can assure folks that the software is going to be available for everybody, as will the data, to draw councilmanic districts. And so, one of the things we should be doing is like, what is the best way to get as many people involved in drafting their own maps and their own districts to then bring to their council members? Because this stuff does get kind of, a little bit nuanced, a little bit complicated when you actually start looking at where the lines are drawn. And, to give, to put yourself in a position of a council member, it is far easier to consider specific lines on a map that are being brought to you by constituents, as opposed to kind of like a general idea about what someone would want to see. So again, I think this is where I'd love to pause for a moment and just kind of like welcome thoughts or feedback, reactions to what might be lying in front of us.
Feel free to unmute yourself, or if you can't, just raise your hand up. But you should be able to unmute yourself. Okay.
Yeah, I'd also be happy to like riff a little bit more about what we think this could look like. But I guess I'd actually this is a question I'll put to the group. I mean, given Annette brought up earlier the fact that there are a number of cities, a number of communities around the city that are gentrifying. There are other communities that have been more stagnant. What is what's I'm trying to like think of a description without kind of giving away, local organizations that are very much plugged into that development process, which would be probably perfect nodes for this discussion about where redistricting takes place. Give folks more hands. Sometimes wards are serve as these organizations. Sometimes civic groups, CDCs.
So there's a question about curious to know if you know who on council is not, curious to know what your sense is of who is or isn't friendly to changing the lines.
Well, I guess it might be two questions there. I'll address them both. As far as a question about changing the process for drawing the lines, we actually never had, direct conversations with council members about, amending the process because got caught up in the 2020 elections, and that was going to be a tall order. I mean, my guess and my presumption is most council members will not be all that interested in changing the process for drawing the lines. I mean, right now the process to go through them, and naturally they're going to want to kind of keep that control there. As far as the council members and how they'd want to see their lines changed, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think it's going to depend a great deal on a given council member and what their districts look like right now, and what's changed. And actually, just like at the moment, I wouldn't want to speculate about that. But I think, something for folks in this group to think about when you're going to your council member, whoever they are, your district council member, is, how communities changed within that district. And what might that district member be thinking about, given those changes. For example, I mean, for a district where there's been population growth, that council member, they know that their lines will have to change to some extent, and they're going to have to depart with some part of their current territory, for lack of a better way of putting it. So it's a really good question. I'm not going to like try to speculate, district by district what each member might be thinking of, but this is a really effective exercise when you're advocating or lobbying any elected official. Do your best to put yourself in their shoes, and think about, like, given what the changes are in a given neighborhood, like what's that council member thinking about. And frankly, the more a district is probably going to have to change because of population differences, the more that council member is probably thinking about this process. And that's happening more in some council districts than others. Oh, Steve, I think you're muted there.
Sorry, Glenda, I'm unmuting you. I saw your hands up. The only other thing is I'm gonna ask folks to complete the survey if they have to hop off, since we usually end at 7. But we could hang around for like 10 more minutes if folks are interested. But please complete the survey. One of the questions of the survey does ask you if you are interested in talking to your council member about the redistricting process to create a public process. And if you say yes to that question, add your email and phone number so I can connect you with different organizations and groups, including Community 70, who are doing that work. So just please complete the survey. Glenda, you are unmuted.
Well, actually, you just kind of answered that question on what groups and how to keep abreast of these changes that are going on in the district and population and things like that. But you just answered that, so thank you.
No problem. Great.
Yeah, I'll just follow on to that real quick. I mean, given that in 2010 there's a public engagement project around the redistricting process. Now there's the Draw the Lines campaign has been a fairly massive and unprecedented civic engagement process across the state. There's absolutely going to be a lot of folks paying attention to this not this year but next year, and the redistricting software will be available. And a whole bunch of groups. I mean, I know, like, Steve's been all over this for some time. We did have to get through the 2020 elections. This has been such a dizzying year. We had to get through these elections first, but there will assuredly be ample opportunity to get the public involved in this. And the more people, the better. I mean, and Steve knows, having worked in the building before. I mean, our elected officials, they respond to their constituents, and the more folks are showing up and making phone calls and sending emails, the more they're going to hear. So this is absolutely going to be what the game plan is going to be in the coming months.
Yep. Great. Awesome. Thanks, Pat. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Yes, I will. I've been doing bad with sending the last 2 sessions slides and recording. I will send those. I just been obviously just packed with different all types of work things happening. The goal is so Thursday is our last session, so the goal is to have a few, basically I'm gonna give updates on what Thursday's the last city council until January, till like mid-January. So on Thursday, the goal is to give an update on all the bills and resolutions and stuff that passed, specifically around the issues that we talked about, like housing, education, like gentrification, and the police accountability stuff that's going on around the FOP. I'll give an update on all of that, if anything, if there's anything that's changed. Also around the courts, I know folks have been asking around the landlord tenant and just like the courts in general. So I'll give an update after the final council session. And then we will have 2 groups come talk to us about what the budget fight is going to look like, given COVID-19 and given all of the things that the mayor and council had to go through to like actually they had to go back, right, like and to relook at our budget. So what does the budget look like going forward in 2021, and like who's going to be doing work around like the budget, specifically the city. I know I'm going to send this in an email too. The city's looking for 15 people to sit on a commission or a steering committee around a participatory budget commission. So they are starting. Maybe they saw our session and it was like, oh, maybe we should do this. I don't know. But they're starting to figure out how they can get the citizen of Philadelphia, like the voters and the people of Philadelphia involved in the budget process, which is great. Because I know that's something we talked about in our last session. So I will give an update on that as well. And then I'm hoping to have 1 or 2 council people come talk to us about what next year looks like in council, and just to say thank you and look forward to like working with us and stuff like that. So I'm sorry again, I couldn't send the police FOP training or the ward training slides, but I will do that hopefully this weekend after our sessions is over. So again, our last session is Thursday. I am hoping to do this again in January. One of the things, so your feedback is super, super important on all the sessions. So I'm going to drop the survey link one more time. I just sent it. If you could stick around for another 4 minutes, complete the survey, that would be great. I just dropped it in a link. And then if you're interested, again, specifically on this issue, please feel free to like also indicate that as well. But other than that, I'll see you all on Thursday. And thanks again, Pat, for coming.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
Yep, no problem. So I'm gonna keep this live for another round, and for another 4 minutes. If you missed the cool song that I played earlier, I'm gonna play that again for folks. It's like 3 minutes long, and then I'm gonna end the call at 7:10 if I can find that song actually.
Representative democracy in USA, we elect legislators, that's how laws are made. 435 reps in Congress means 435 districts among us. But how do we decide who represents who? We draw lines on a map, that's what we do. Population should be roughly the same, so every vote counts in the very same way. Keep communities together, so every voice is heard. Since populations move, shift, shrink, and expand, we get some data every census, then we draw them again. So politicians are accountable to every last woman and man. Look at all this private money changing hands to change these redistricting plans. The state legislators have draw the lines. Cracking and cracking, kidnapping, hijacking. We decide how we divide. Place this district, we draw the lines. If you want your party to win it all, but a whole lot of money to lose. Just redraw those lines when it's election time. They're all cracking up, I'm cracking up. When the opposition is more widespread and you don't want to lose them all, just roll the names on the face. Back them up, just back them up. Cracking and cracking, kidnapping, hijacking. We decide how we divide. Place this district, we draw the lines. Got to draw the line somewhere, but you can't just start it anywhere. One man, one vote, that's ridiculous. Your voice must be heard. If you really want an incumbency, but the people love her way too much. Just draw her home with someone else's song. She never hurts, I can't go wrong. And if you don't care about minorities, So much static from both parties, Republican and Democratic. They won't stop fighting, the people have had it, but they do agree on one thing. It's tragic, they want something, grab it, and we catch you both in the back room laughing. If you want to see bipartisan stacks, just crack it, back, go ahead, kidnap it. Cracking and cracking, kidnapping, hijacking. We decide how we divide. Resistance, we online.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna drop the saver. I'll send this also in an email. Thanks you all for coming tonight to talk about redistricting at the councilmanic level. I'll see y'all all on Thursday for our last session. Take care, everyone.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Have a good one, everyone.
By giving a half twist